From the 13th chapter of St. Matthew. Jesus climbed a mountain and invited those who wanted with him. They climbed together. He settled on 12 and designated them apostles. The plan was that they would be with him, and he would send them out to proclaim the word and give authority to banish demons. These are the 12. Simon, Jesus later named him Peter, meaning rock. James, son of Zebedee. John, brother of James, Jesus nicknamed the Zebedee brothers. Boanerges, meaning sons of thunder. Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas. James, son of Alphaeus. Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite. Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Just then his mothers and brothers showed up. They relayed a message that they wanted a word with him. He was surrounded by the crowd when he was given the message. Your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside looking for you. Jesus responded, Who do you think are my mother and brothers? Looking around, taking in everyone seated around him, he said, Right here, right in front of you, my mother and my brothers. Obedience is thicker than blood. The person who obeys God's will is my brother and sister and mother. And from the 10th chapter of St. John. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and they know me. Just as the Father knows me, I know the Father, and I gave up my life for my sheep. I have other sheep that are not in this sheep end. I must bring them together too. When they hear my voice, there will be one flock of sheep and one shepherd. Here ends the reading. Please be seated. My sermon series for this Easter season has been titled On the Fourth Day. The Bible teaches us that on the third day Jesus raised Jesus from the dead, or that God rose Jesus from the dead. So we've been considering what this means for the fourth day and beyond. For the disciples, it meant that they were called to live resurrection lives. And over the weeks we've been looking at Jesus' disciples equipped with the Spirit, living those resurrection lives. We began with the Apostle John and then Thomas, the doubter, Andrew, and Matthew. Next week, actually, we're going to be looking at someone who is not among the 12, but a very important figure in the story of Christ and the resurrection. Because since next week is Mother's Day, we're going to be looking at Mary, the mother of the Lord. On Pentecost, May 15th, we're going to center on the disciples, who whenever the disciples are listed, he's always listed first. Peter, the rock. Well, I'm going to play a clip from a theme song. Most of you are probably going to recognize it, and this, I hope, is going to help introduce today's message. That, of course, was the opening theme for Gilligan's Island the first season. I tell you the first season because it changed the next season. The next season, the way the song ended was the Professor and Mary Ann Gilligan. The island was named after him, after all. Skipper. Say no more, he was a skipper. Thurston Howell and his wife, the millionaires. And Ginger, the movie star. And even the professor seemed to have that special role of being problem solver. But then there was Mary Ann. She kind of fit the role of the rest. There was nothing that made her stand out. She was simply a girl who grew up on a farm in Kansas. Maybe you didn't even know that. Well, this morning we consider the rest. We have Peter and James and John and Andrew and Matthew and Thomas. Notice the list again. Remember, I indicated that they were generally listed according to importance. And even if Judas Iscariot was listed at the end, we know all about him. He had a standout role and could easily be the centerpiece of a sermon. But then there's the rest. We read them in history, about them in history, perhaps how they were martyred for Christ. But for the most part, the only thing we know about them is they were apostles. They were on the list of the 12. That, of course, you might say is significant in itself. After all, the bottom three, not including Judas Iscariot, James, Thaddeus, and Simon, we remember them as the rest. It would seem that they did not distinguish themselves like Peter or John. I can't tell you a great deal about Thaddeus. There are two disciples named James. Interestingly, one, the brother of John, son of Zebedee, right there on the top of the list, is remembered as James the Great. Peter, James, and John, they were always front and center. So he's remembered in history as James the Great. Well, towards the bottom list, you see another James. You know what he was called? Here it's James, son of Alphaeus, to distinguish him. But he's remembered as James the Lesser. And then there's a disciple that Mark refers to as Simon the Canaanite, sometimes referred to as Simon the Zealot. As a zealot, we know a little bit about him, but all three of the final ones, Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and James, son of Alphaeus, they have one thing in common. We know practically nothing about them. They are, it seems to be, counted as simply among the rest. So if we were singing the disciple song, we'd probably end the rest. We'd be talking about Thaddeus, sometimes referred to as Jude. And when the Gospel of John actually writes the list, he's also called Judas, but then he also makes it very clear, Judas, not Iscariot. So we have Thaddeus, sometimes referred as a disciple with three names, Simon the Zealot and James the Lesser. Now again, if you Google any one of these disciples, you'll probably read this. Very little known about them. Very little known about them. But this we do know. They're counted among that incredible group chosen by Jesus to change the world. And keep in mind, if you are chosen by Jesus, it's for a purpose. See, in the end, God will never forget them. In fact, in the book of Revelation, when John has his vision of heaven, we hear something about them. The glory of God made the city bright. It was dazzling and crystal clear like a precious jasper stone. The city had high and thick walls with 12 gates. Each of them was guarded by an angel. On each of the gates was written the name of the one of the 12 tribes of Israel. 3 of the 3 gates were on the east, 3 were on the north, 3 were on the south, and the other 3 were on the west. The city was built on 12 foundation stones. On each of the stones was written the name of one of the Lamb's apostles. See, 3 disciples were remembered by us as simply just the rest. God declares they're stones upon which his kingdom is built. Nicole Johnson, a motivational speaker, is best known for her work called The Invisible Woman. I have a little clip that I'm going to play for you. It's actually a long clip, so I'm only going to play a piece of it. But she starts out saying, it started out slowly, but I feel like I'm kind of invisible. And she talks about situations where she'll say something to her children like, turn down the TV, and they don't hear her, till finally she turns it down. She says, I finally realized they don't see me. They don't hear me. I'm invisible. And then she was presented with a special gift.
And she said, I brought you this. It was a book on the great cathedrals of Europe. I didn't understand. And then I read her inscription. She wrote, with admiration for the greatness of what you are building when no one sees. You can't name the names of the people who built the great cathedrals. Over and over again, looking at these mammoth works, you scan down to find the names, and it says, builder, unknown, unknown, unknown. They completed things not knowing that anyone would notice. There's a story about one of the builders who was carving a tiny bird inside a beam that would be covered over by the roof. And someone came up to him and said, why are you spending so much time on something no one will ever see? And it's reported that the builder replied, because God sees. They trusted that God saw everything. They gave their whole lives for a work, a mammoth work they would never see finished. They showed up day after day. Some of these cathedrals took over 100 years to build. That was more than one working man's lifetime, day after day. And they made personal sacrifices for no credit. Showing up at a job they would never see finished, for a building their name would never be on. One writer even goes so far as to say no great cathedral will ever be built again, because so few people are willing to sacrifice to that degree. I closed the book, and it was as if I heard God say, I see you. You are not invisible to me. No sacrifice is too small for me to notice. I see every cupcake baked, every sequin sewn on, and I smile over everyone. I see every tear of disappointment when things don't go the way you want them to go. But remember, you are building a great cathedral.
See, the truth is, most of us, when it comes right down to it, will be remembered as the rest. We can go through our entire lives doing what seems to be the kind of things that most people do. You can be a loyal worker, showing up on time at work every day, doing your very best, but don't really stand out. Among the employees, you might simply be remembered as among the rest. You might be a mom or a dad, and of course, hopefully to your children, you're not just an ordinary mom or dad. But in all honesty, most of us really don't do more than most moms and dads do. Among moms and dads, we're probably beyond the list of the rest. I have a sweatshirt that reads, World's Greatest Grandpa. I was walking through the grocery store one day and somebody said to me, I have that exact same sweatshirt. And he said, how could there be two of us? And I said, well, I'm the greatest grandpa to my grandkids, and that's everything. See, through life we take on many roles. Might be the role of caring for your elderly parents, but again, there's people doing that every day. It's important work, but in the end, you're just a part of those lists who are trying to do your best to honor God in all that you do. On President's Day, I'm sure you've noticed if you go on the internet every once in a while, one of those quizzes pop up, and sometimes I'm tempted to take them. On President's Day, there was one where they gave a whole list of like a couple hundred names, and you were supposed to, out of that list, pick the 43 presidents of the United States. Now, you know there's 44. Obama was on the list, but Grover Cleveland served non-consecutive terms, so he's on the list once but counts twice. I went through a list, and interestingly, I did pretty well. I actually ended up with 42. Missed one. I understand there were many people on that list who people clicked off as being presidents who never were. People who hear your name and they say, he must have been a president, like Benjamin Franklin. He must have been a president, but he never was. Well, the one I missed was John Tyler. I understand the one that's most often missed is Chester Arthur. Say, who is Chester Arthur? Think about that. He served as president of the United States for 40 years. And almost lost in history. The only thing we really remember about him is he was on the list. And then when people try remembering the list, they don't even remember him. The woman was old and ragged and gray, and bent with the chill of a winter's day. The streets were white with a recent snow, and the woman's feet with age were slow. In the crowded crossing she waited long, jostled aside by the careless throng of human beings who passed her by, unheeding the glance of her anxious eye. Down the street with laughter and shout, glad in the freedom of school let out, come happy boys like a flock of sheep. Hailing the snow piled wide and deep, past the woman so old and gray, hasten the children on their way. None offered a helping hand to her, so weak and timid, afraid to stir, lest the carriage wheels on the horse's feet should trample her down in the slippery street. At last came out of the merry troop the gayest boy of all the group. He paused beside her and whispered, "Lo, I'll help you across if you wish to go." Her aged's hand on his strong young arm she placed, and so without hurt or harm, he guided the trembling feet along. Proud that his own were young and strong, then back again to his friends he went, his young heart happy and well content. She's somebody's mother, boys, you know, for all she's aged and poor and slow, and someone sometime may lend a hand to help my mother, you understand. If ever she's old and poor and gray, and her own dear boy so far away. Somebody's mother bowed low her head in her home that night, and the prayer she said was, God be kind to that noble boy who is somebody's son in pride and joy. I decided as I was finishing up this sermon to look in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and look at the obituaries. Listed on Thursday, there were 12 new obits. I looked them over. I did not know one of them. Not a one. To me, they were just a list of names. But then I started reading the obits. A couple of them had nicknames, but mostly they were known as beloved wife or husband, loving mother, cherished grandfather, proud grandmother. See, Nicole Johnson is absolutely right. At the end, even though most of us will simply be a name on a list, God knows everything. He sees everything. He has put you on a list that means everything. See, you're in the book of life. You're not just anybody, you're a child of God. And God remembers even the tiniest things you have done to honor His name. Think about this. If the only person who ever remembers your name is Jesus, that's enough. On Memorial Day coming up soon, we'll be reminded of the tomb of the unknown soldier. There have been so many who have lost their lives defending our country. Some are remembered and honored. Others are simply included among the rest. But God knows their sacrifice in their hearts. So see, perhaps these three disciples, the lesser lights, should be more encouraging to us than all of the rest. Those rest that are remembered as super saints. Because these lesser known apostles were just as important as all the others. Because from them we learn a very valuable lesson. This is important. Because behind the scenes in any church, in any community, there's always unsung heroes. People who serve quietly without public acclamation. Doing those things that are essential for our health and growth. The truth of the matter is the majority of Christians must be ready to serve God in that exact way, anonymously, with little or no accolade. Because there are not that many spotlights for Christian heroes on this side of eternity. Yet Jesus, in his band of followers, he needed Peter and John and James the Greater. But God also understood if his church was to change the world, he also needed James the Lesser, and Judas not Iscariot, and Simon the Zealot. So don't ever forget, if at times you feel as if you are no more than a name on a list, simply count it as the rest. Jesus knows you by name. In fact, he gave his life for you. So when we speak about living resurrection lives, it's recognizing that you are more than a name on a list. So let me end with a very important question. is there any way you can be counted among God's favorites? You might be thinking, can I be a Peter or a James the Greater? But hear this. If you're a follower of Jesus, I have some good news for you. You're already there. It's okay to be counted among the rest as long as your name is disciple. Amen.